No, I think it's basically fundamental in terms of when much is given, much is expected to be given back in return. And there's so much people can consume in terms of wealth and require in terms of wealth. If one has been blessed or been fortunate enough to have got much more than normal wealth, it is but natural that one expects a certain fiduciary responsibility in terms of how that wealth is applied, used, and leveraged for purposes of society. I think the concept of the strong linkage to the family is breaking down in Western nations. So the obligations which I think to an extent not only Indian but many Asian people feel towards their families is much less in terms of Western people and particularly American people. So when you take a philosophy approach that you do not have to leave wealth to your families, you then have to tell yourself, do you take it to the grave or do you donate it for some more worthwhile purpose? And this also reflects in the way that families get structured. You know, children live separately. Children put old parents into homes instead of putting them into their homes. What the children expect from the parents and what the parents expect from their children. We have been focusing on primary education in India for the past 9 years, both in Wipro Limited as well as in the foundation we set up or I set up. You had to make a bet where you think you could really make a contribution, where you could really build a depth understanding. So we were very clear from day one that we had to have a focus. Two is it had to be a cause which was relevant to the country in terms of need, a critical cause in terms of need, where you saw a gap between what could be and what is. And three, it should be an area where it should have an access beyond just a specific educating of a child. We concluded that if we could educate children better in our country, you would have better citizens. But importantly, we also realized that if you educate the girl child, when she grows up and starts a family, she has a smaller family, which is a huge requirement in terms of the growth of our population, which is more manageable. And three, again, if you educate the girl child, when she grows up and she starts a family or looks after a household, she has much higher consciousness on primary health care. I think, what you must understand is the state of education in India. You have one side the cities, which have very good schools, average schools, and not so good schools. The level of education in these cities is fairly good. They get fairly good teachers. On the other side, you have the villages of India, where 65 to 70% of the people of India live. And there we have education which is in the villages, and 90% of that education is run by the state governments, partly funded by the central government, where the state government does not charge any fees, gives free uniforms, gives a free midday meal, which is very often the best meal the child gets, and where there are 6 million unionized teachers in the state's governments, the multiple state governments which we have across the country. Standards of education there are very, very low. The commitment of the teachers is very, very low. The quality of the teachers, the training of the teachers is very, very low. So there's an enormous amount one can do to upgrade the quality of teaching, the quality of the teachers, the way the curricula is actually learned, the way it is facilitated to be learned, the way you can community intervene to get community pressures building up on the education system to demand certain standards, the way you can train the teacher training institutes. There are 600 districts in India. Every district in India has a teacher training institute. And every teacher in the state government school requires to spend 15 days of retraining in these institutes. Most of these institutes are in shambles, and many of them have teachers who are worse than the teachers they're supposed to teach. So there's an enormous amount of leverage one can do in terms of upgrading this entire infrastructure, for which the government spends a lot of money. There's an enormous amount one can do in training and upgrading the quality of the state functionaries. That's precisely what we do in our foundation. And we have been successful now because we have been working for 9 years in this. And we are involved now with over 2.5 million children. I think the most important thing is we have to maintain fiscal discipline, whether it be in our fiscal deficits, whether it be in terms of focusing, in terms of development, in areas which can generate scarce resources and therefore back inflation rates, and in terms of integrity in our leadership. Oh, that's completely irrelevant, frankly. One wouldn't even think of it. It's a mature democracy of 1.11 billion people. We've had a tradition of successful democracy since 46, 47. We're probably one of the only governments, democratic governments in the world, which for more than 10 years has successfully led and managed coalition governments, alliance governments. Britain is facing it now, and they're panicked. Whereas we have done it successfully for 10 years, 3 governments, and done it, and the job has got done. The job of nation building, the job of nation leadership in a difficult, complex coalition government has worked. What more maturity can you expect from a democracy? It will make sense because the companies are going up the value chain. And as the international companies are trying to learn our business model, we are learning their business model probably faster than they're learning our business model. So cost arbitrage will always be there, because the cost arbitrage is not determined by 2 million engineers in the country who are working on a job, or 3 million engineers in a country who are working on a job. The cost arbitrage is determined by the standard of living of over 1 billion people, which is still much, much lower than the rest of the developed world, much, much lower. And when the developed world escalates even at 3% on salary levels a year, they escalate on a base of 100. Whereas even if we escalate at 7% a year on a salary level, or 10% a year on a salary level, we escalate not on a base of 100, but we escalate on a base of somewhere between 10 and 20. So you just run mathematics and you will find that even at high inflation rates, the gap continues to be there, if not increase. I think the Chinese government is realizing that the economy is overheating. So I think they will take proactive steps to slow it down. The last quarter, I understand the growths are running at rates of 12% a year GDP. And two, I think the Chinese government is seriously considering whether they should firm the Chinese currency because of international pressure, but also because the economy is heating up too much in terms of flows through exports. One is very obviously, which every economist will tell you, it's got to fix its problem of the fiscal deficit. It's getting out of control. Two, I think the American consumer must learn to live within his or her means. You cannot have a society where you spend more than you earn. I mean, it's just fundamentally not viable in the long run. I think the corrective steps which are taking place now should lead in the right direction. I think one is that the American consumer is learning to save. Why? The savings which were running negative now are running between 4 and 5%. And so far as the fiscal deficit is concerned, I think the president and his team are addressing issues which are economic to see to it that they come under more contained fiscal deficit. And the president is making tough decisions, which is why he is getting unpopular with some of the commercial leadership. I'm a supreme optimist. My big concern is that this period of reset of the world, too much protectionism is building up among the developed world. And that protectionism is very dangerous. And that protectionism is also building up among services, which is the next emerging flow of trade, because 60% of the world is services, 40% of the world is products and agriculture. Or industry and agriculture. If the developed world starts putting restrictions on flow of services, the developing world, which has power of economics and power of consumption markets, will put restrictions on flow of products. And that's very simple to do, because all you have to do is raise import tariffs, which have fallen on a systematic basis over the past 10, 15 years. So you trigger a war of less trade. I think that would be the most regressive thing that the developed world could be doing.